Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Southern Scrap Nation's podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Jonas, and on today's episode, we'll be doing a special fight analysis of the UFC 223's co-main event, and on top of that, we'll be breaking down some recent news that happened this weekend of what happened to the main event that turned out not to be the greatest April Fool's joke of all time. As much as we'd like to think it was, it just so happened to fall on the worst day. So before we get into that, remember to like, subscribe, review the podcast on iTunes as well as Spotify and Google Play. You can also find us on YouTube at the Southern Scrap Nation YouTube channel and on all forms of social media at Southern Scrap Nation. So today I was going to do a special breakdown of UFC 223's co-main event, just like I did for the main event, Tony versus Khabib. Got a lot of responses. I appreciate it, guys, as well as the views. I do really appreciate the uptick on that. On top of that, I want to go back and rephrase what I said on one video, or that video. I said that that fight was scheduled 3 times. It was 4 times I was corrected. Thank you once again. Appreciate the correction. However, due to recent light that came out last night, this fight now has been scheduled 4 times and has been canceled 4 times. Last night, Tony Ferguson came out and Dana White put out a whole promo that seemed very April Foolish, but turns out Tony Ferguson is out. He suffered a knee injury this past week and went in for an MRI and tore his knee. That being said, it's one of those things where, as much as we'd like to think it happened from training, no, he was just walking, saw someone that he didn't expect to see, so he took a sharp turn, tripped, and hurt his knee. Yeah. So MMA gods are nothing but jokers, I guess. Because, like I said, this is the greatest lightweight fight ever booked, right? And yet, can't seem to get it to happen. 4 times out of 4 times, even the last time, oh, the 3rd time will be the charm. Nope. And then the 4th time, oh, the 4th time has to work. Nope. Dana White went on record saying, hell no, I will not book this event ever again. So that brings me to think, will we ever see it again? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't really... I'm still so heartbroken for him. I'm not as heartbroken as the last time. It's almost past that, which is not where you want to get, but it's that point. All right, move on. I'll move on. I guess this isn't just not in the cards. This is not in the cards for us. It's not in the cards for hardcore MMA fans. It's not in the card for the average MMA fan. Maybe one day, when Dana doesn't care, we'll book it again, but till then, guess not. So, who's stepping in for Tony Ferguson? Because, you have to have a main event. In Joanna and Rose, as much as there is some history there, and it's a great fight, it's not to the magnitude of what Tony and Khabib was. So, who's the best representation for Tony? Is it a Nate Diaz? Possibly Nate Diaz would have been a good choice, but we don't know where Nate is, and to get down to 155 for a title weight, that'd be hard. Connor's been talking all this shit, but I don't think he would be ready for this fight, nor would he want to risk fighting Khabib on 6 days' notice. Wow, that doesn't leave a lot of options. You can look at the top 5 division, or top 5 in the lightweight division, but the UFC went about that the right way, and they circled back. They took the champ from 145. We got Maxie, baby. Max Holloway stepping in from Tony Ferguson at UFC 223 for the new main event. UFC featherweight champion, Max Holloway, is going for his chance to be a 2-time UFC champion, or a 2-weight world champion at the 55-pound weight division, 155-pound weight division. Now, what is that? I personally love this fight. Now, is this too much too soon? We'll get into that in a little bit on more of a breakdown side of it. However, there's a lot of good possibilities that can come from this. As much as a lot of people don't really see, and you'll see from the betting, it opened up as Khabib being a very overwhelming favorite, or minus 500 to like a plus something. I would have to look, but it was a minus 500. So opening up as a very big favorite to Max Holloway, and Max coming in at, being from a 145er to coming up to 155 to fight a guy who could essentially, like I went into the podcast before, or the fight breakdown before, could fight at 170. So we'll see. I'll get into the breakdown after I give you guys your long-awaited co-main event breakdown. I feel like we should go into that first, get you guys hyped up a little bit, and then we could talk about all the possibilities that can come from that fight. So before we get into that breakdown, just want to shout out to Charlotte Jiu-Jitsu Academy here in South End, coached by John Piper and the whole gang of guys there, as well as the UFC gym down in Matthews. Now, to move on to the co-main event. The co-main event, also, this podcast is powered by Pete's Coffee. Pete's Coffee, keeping me up. And keeping me awake for all these announcements. And I stayed up last night waiting till 12 in the morning, even later, but just waiting for me to see if this was a April Fool's joke. Like, I know that Dana White was like, no, this is no April Fool's joke, but goddamn, that would be a great April Fool's joke. They would have everybody. It would have been the best PR move in the game, right? So I stayed up late, waiting for this news to settle in. So the co-main event: Rose Namajunas versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk for the strawweight championship. Now this is a rematch. Rose recently took Joanna's belt back in New York, right? That was the night where we got Ann New for 3 different fights. You got the GSP versus Michael Bisping, the Cody versus TJ, and the Rose versus Joanna. This fight took place and was finished in the first round. Joanna got dropped by Rose, and Rose finished with strikes. She got dropped twice, and then was finished with strikes the second time. So to get into it, tail of the tape for both these girls, they're both standing at 5'5", 5'6", and with the same reach of 65 inches. So there's not really much to take from there. Joanna, and I'll get into that part of it because I guess it's playing a big part of this narration of the fight, of the second part. But I guess being 5'6", she comes in a little heavy for 125, and she came out saying that her weight cut was very bad for that fight, and that's what drained her, and that's why she got dropped, and talking all about that. So the really key things that I see when you look at the stats between them, their accuracy and strikes are actually they're relatively the same, right? They're 45% accurate, and Joanna's 49% accurate, favoring a little bit Joanna, the higher experienced fighter. Obviously throws a little bit more strikes, and when you watch her pace, it's clear that she throws volume. Absorbed, Joanna gets hit a little bit less with 2.4% of the time, where Rose gets hit 3% of the time more than Joanna. And then defense-wise with striking, obviously Joanna was 67%, and then Rose was 60%. Now, when you look at their records, it kind of, obviously the records favor Joanna with the 14-1, whereas Rose has an 8-3 record. It seems less experienced, whereas Joanna has more experience with less losses, and Rose, her record seems more juvenile with more losses. Losses are harder pill to swallow, especially in MMA at the highest level. In the UFC, that's where you don't want to lose. But, losing before getting into the UFC is also not a bad thing. Get your losses in earlier, deal with them, and then when you come to the big stage, you can deal with that at a higher level. And then when it comes to grappling, JJ's overall grappling is like 66%. It's pretty high, but that comes from her takedown defense, which is 81%, where Rose She rocks a 45% takedown defense. Obviously, her takedowns are not really taking her down to the ground is not necessarily the greatest thing, and she pulls not necessarily pulls takedowns, but she causes scrambles with her takedowns. Hers are a lot of clench based, so it could go 50-50 either way depending on how good the person's balance is. She's not really shooting a lot of double legs, single legs, um, you know, chain wrestling. She's doing a lot of work from the clench. But her submission average is way higher than Joanna's. Joanna's has this 0% submission average, obviously. So, like I said, actually, takedown accuracy for Joanna is also higher as well, 66% accurate. She doesn't do a lot of takedowns, so if she does get one, it's probably a reversal, right? So that's probably what boosts them up. Like I said, takedowns, obviously, there's more of a favor in the Rose corner. So, there's not a lot to take away from this fight considering the first time it happened. And the beauty about rematches is as much as you can look at prior fight experience, and I'll pull up a little of their prior fight experience, really what you take away from previous matchups is just that matchup. You don't have to watch any of their other fights, right? Because they did round one. So you can already see what their game plans were, and if it was successful in the first round, it's probably what they're going to go for the second time. Now, what can Joanna do to bring it back? Well, that'll be addressed because, to be honest, Rose didn't expose any holes of Joanna. Joanna doesn't really have any holes in the striking game, and it wasn't like Rose took her down and exposed some ground game level, just like in the Francis Ngannou versus Stipe fight. Right? Stipe exposed a huge hole. Francis has no ground game. Joanna is a complete fighter in the lane that she is. She took what got her to the dance, expanded on it, moved it to work for MMA. It worked beyond compare, and then in between those times, she worked on wrestling defense. Trained over in Poland for a while, and then she made the move over to ATT. And then worked with high-level wrestlers at American Top Team down in Florida, and then just expanded her wrestling defense and worked a little bit more on jiu-jitsu, worked on that ground game. So she sharpened as much as she could with the striking to the point where if you stand with Joanna, you're standing with a 7-time Muay Thai champion. You're standing with the greatest of all time in that aspect. Now, that shows a lot of, what's the word for it? Shows a lot of shine of what Chuck Liddell was, right? Or not Chuck Liddell specifically, but that's Stephen Wonderboy Thompson time. And not necessarily Stephen Wonderboy Thompson either, but where the specialists dominate. That generation of fighters, specialists, they dominate. We're seeing a change in the men's division. We already have for a while now where MMA fighters are changing the game. When Rory McDonald popped on the scene, that was the youngest kid to start MMA and not be a specialist in something and then get into MMA, right? We're seeing a lot of kids now that are just MMA fighters, and they got into MMA, and that's all they know. Mickey Gall's one. All these younger cats are all just MMA fighters from the get-go. They weren't, I was this and then get into this. They have experience in others, right? They may have competed in jiu-jitsu. They may have competed in boxing. They may have competed in something else, but that was just experience till they could get to the bigger stage. So, looking back on this fight, luckily, and where does Rose fit into that picture? She's one of those girls that started MMA. So, going back to that rematch thing, I can say they do have a similar opponent that we can look at on how each dealt with the other. Because their similar opponent put each through the ringer, right? Joanna may have won against this girl, but this girl didn't go down easy. And then on top of that, Rose lost to this girl, but put up a good fight, right? And there was a little bit of a hole that this girl exposed on Rose, and I hope she changed it up. But if they wanted to look back at it, this is where they want to get to. The similar opponent was Karolina Kowalkiewicz. So when Carolina stepped into the ring against Joanna for the second time, technically, her only loss was an amateur loss to Joanna back in the day, back in Poland. A lot of animosity going into that fight, and she got that title shot off of the win that she picked up over Rose. She took that win from Rose, so let's break down how Carolina dealt with Rose to get to that title shot. And then we'll talk about how Joanna dealt with Carolina. So in order for Carolina to get into that position, she fought Rose, and that fight was broken down in this manner. First, Rose, I think, has a lot of power for the 115 pound division, right? Not necessarily because she's a big girl. I think technically she works with the likes of Trevor Whitman, Pat Barry, these high level striking coaches that really found a way to develop her tech. And she's always been a fighter, and she developed this technique where she knows how to get the most out of her punch, right? She knows how to turn it all the way, right? When she's on, she's on. When she turns that punch over, you can see it in girls' face. They get hit, they're like, oh, that's a sharp pain. It's not that bruising, pushing, thudding pain. She's turned the punches over. She turns her kicks over very well. All her technique is on point, so when she lands, the power comes to the full effect, regardless of how big she is, or how small she is in this case. So Carolina was getting hit in the beginning rounds. I honestly was giving the first round more of an edge to Rose. I was like, oh, shit. Like, I don't know how this got away from her. Because she lost a majority decision loss in this fight. Unanimous decision. So, in the first round, you see Rose was doing very well using her footwork. Carolina started taking the center of the ring. She was getting walked down. But the whole entire time, Rose, she traded. She got in her shots. She clipped her with left hooks. She was doing good using that new age fundamental striking movement rather than the old plotting Muay Thai stance or the very traditional whatever stance you come from. Carolina coming out more in a taekwondo-ish karate stance, bouncing back and forth, hands are lower. But Rose, the same kind of thing. She popped her with 1-2s. Very clean, Nate Diaz-esque 1-2s. Bop, bop, right? 1-2, 1-2. Maybe, and then she threw a 1-1-2 at one point to disrupt rhythm. But all her punches are very, like very boxing, well-timed. Oh, I feel like I'm about to sneeze. Ooh, all right. Beat that. All right, the hole that I was talking about in the game that was exposed, not necessarily was her cardio, but the way that her cardio was taken out of her. In the second round, Karolina Kowalkiewicz found a home for the tie clinch, or just not even the tie clinch, but just a regular clinch, and was powering shots. Knees to the body, knees to the body, knees to the body. And those knees to the body started to labor Rose's rhythm and her power, and started, obviously taking knees to the body doesn't feel good, but it was just draining her cardio. And you could see it, her punches stopped turning over, that snap stopped, and she started pushing into him. She started using those thudding punches every time she threw an overhand. It was more, trying to push Carolina rather than snapping it and bringing it back. But those knees to the body kept on happening every time they clenched up, and that's fair. Rose is it's not a bad option for Rose to clench up with a girl, because her submission skills, and when she took Carolina down and she was on top, she applied very good top game. Rose has a very, very good top game. You saw it in the Paige Van Zandt fight. When she got on top, it was almost like Luke Rockhold on top of you. Just bearing down, pressure, 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 and then just ground and pound, pressure. Very good on top until she takes the back. And once she takes the back, obviously it goes from there. And when she's on the ground or on her back, it's no slouch. She's always throwing up submissions, trying to better her position, trying to escape. So on the ground, whenever it went there, and that's what she was trying to get to avoid the knees, she was doing well, but it wasn't the type of ground game that we were used to because of the laboring in her movement due to the punching or due to the knees to the body. So if Joanna can get to that position, well then you can unless Rose has made an adjustment in that area, you could conceivably do very well, and that could be her kryptonite is to clench up and show her what a tie clench is. Because there's an area of expertise that Joanna holds that Rose doesn't, and that's the tie clench. As much as Rose has done a lot of jiu-jitsu and a lot of wrestling, a very good tie fighter who can throw knees and who can throw elbows in the clinch is going to negate a lot of that just wrestling kind of head pressure. However, Rose has been doing a lot of work with the only girl to beat Joanna. Not the only girl, but the girl to outmatch Joanna in all championship Muay Thai fights, and that's Shevchenko. She does a lot of work with Valentina, a bigger, more or a bigger girl with better wrestling than Joanna, an overall better mixed martial artist than Joanna. And there's nothing to take away from Joanna. It's just Valentina's very good on the feet, but she also now has this dominating wrestling game that we saw in her last fight that Joanna would never think about doing because of. And it's not that she couldn't, and it's not that I haven't seen video of Joanna wrestling and that she's not talented. It's just that that's not her game, and she'd never think about going there. That's not, she's so invested in the go, what got you to the dance mentality, whereas Valentina was just like, we'll try this wrestling stuff too. So, that being said, if Joanna can make this a 5-round fight and go to the body and really turn it on in the tie clinch, I think there's a very big chance that we could see Joanna take this fight, all right, win those later rounds, do the champion round mentality that she always has, just turn it on at the last second. 200 and something leg kicks fired in one round, Joanna. How many times can you do that, right? Until it starts wearing on your body? I'm not sure. She's not planning to do this for a very long time, but for the time being, right? I don't know how many times you can throw 200 to 400 leg kicks in a fight, but these are one of those fights where you're gonna have to drag this girl in deep water because she's never been 5 rounds. She's almost been 5 rounds. She submitted Paige, but she was just doing work on Paige, so it didn't really exhaust much of her energy. She was mostly taking advantage of that fight so she could rest on her. She felt comfortable in the striking, so there was no labored punching. She didn't really get tagged. She kind of came out there pretty clean. So cardio-wise, yeah, she does very well. She does very well when she's putting pressure on someone, when the cardio's in her favor. But when you have to chase a girl down and then get hit while a girl chases you down, it's a little bit harder to keep that up. And then through the fourth and fifth round, can you keep it up as well as you did in the first and second? So when Joanna fought Carolina, that was a fight where she implemented that game plan: stay on the outside, beat her up, da-da-da. However, there were times where it didn't go in her way. She got clipped in the 4th round, and it almost seemed like Carolina could have her chance. And that's one of those moments where I don't necessarily know if Joanna has a weak. It's not that she has a weak chin or it's defense. She just gets tagged in the right place because of her fighting style. She fights very tall because of her Thai style. She doesn't keep her head low and keep her chin down. She keeps more of like she does keep her chin down. Don't get me wrong. She's an incredible fighter in that way, but when she fights very Thai and aggressive, it exposes her chin a little bit, and it allows her to get caught on certain occasions. And I don't know with the 4-ounce gloves if she just can't take a punch as well. But Carolina caught her in the 4th round. Now, like I said, it doesn't expose anything because she won the fight, and there's no area that exposed Joanna. She gets back to her feet very well, the takedown area. there's not a lot that you can expose in Joanna's game because her game's pretty solid. But we saw in the Carolina fight where it shows a little bit, with a little bit of, and it could be the weight cut. The weight could drain her and cost her chin a little bit. Maybe she would be better at 125. Who knows, right? She wasn't making a weight cut excuse after the Carolina fight, granted, because she won. But could it be the weight cut drains her enough that her chin, when her chin gets exposed and she gets rattled, that she gets hurt a little bit easier? But what we can take away from that Carolina fight is when you strike with Joanna, you can do pretty well. Because it's MMA, so there's a 50-50 chance, right? If one of those small gloves lands perfectly, you can clip a girl, right? If you put the pressure on her, it's hard. It's harder on her. She has to run away, tires her out a little bit more. And if you can just land that one shot, that was Jessica Andrade's plan, was to just land that shot. But the slower that you get, the more predictable you get, and the easier it is for her. So finding that middle range, where Rose did, where she pressured her, and we'll get into that fight in a second. But what I took away from that fight was this. So when Rose fought Joanna, and after Joanna, she's in her place and she was doing all her mental thing. When they first stepped in the ring, I watched that fight again. The first kick that Rose throws, you can see that there's a distinct power difference. She kicks her, Joanna's leg buckles a little bit, it thuds, and you go, oh shit, this girl's got a little bit more power, even though they're kind of the same size, right? And then every punch that Rose landed, there was a distinct difference in power. So Rose was able to back Joanna up a little bit, back her up a little bit, and that caused her to then drop her. The confidence that Rose had going in there helped her. So is this fight about a physical is this fight about the physical record that Joanna holds and the physical lineage or the physical legacy that she has of holding that belt for as much as she did, the amount of time she defended it, being 14-0 at a point, and all the physical hard work that she put into it? Or is it the mental side? Or is it the fact that she had a bunch of these girls beaten before they stepped in there? Carolina, she didn't really have beaten. She used her skills to beat Carolina, as she did the first time. And her personality didn't kick in until, it kicked in during the Carlos Esparza fight, when she gave her that cookie and got into her head there. And she tries to get into Claudia Gadella's fight, or Claudia Gadella's head. Claudia Gadelha, her head, she was always, being a fiery, passionate Brazilian. They had this animosity between each other. So by the second time that they fought each other, Joanna was ready in her head. It was easy to bait her. And then Jessica Andrade has a very specific style. It's just bull rush forward. And she took some lumps on that fight. Wasn't good on the take. Jessica Penne, she bullied kind of, and then won that fight, and walked her forward. It's a very Cowboy Cerrone kind of mentality. When they're able to walk you forward, they just start teeing off on you. And they start being able to showcase their skills at the highest level. So what's the mental aspect of it, where Rose just sat there, stone-faced, technically got in there, used her jab, used her reach instead of trying to bull her way in there, stayed on the outside the inside of the black lines when she was up against the fence, picking her apart with the jab, the 1-2, the pop-pop that she used, instead of having her in her head and then escaping the game plan, or doing a reckless game plan, just trying to land that one shot, or trying to go for the takedown. Right? Joanna's a very Conor McGregor-esque kind of fighter. Oh, take her down. That's the way to win. Not necessarily, because Conor has been training all his life for wrestlers, right? He knows that they want to take him down. If I have a very high KO percentage, more often than not, my takedown defense is probably lower. But if I have a high KO ratio, and then I up my takedown defense, well then more options to find knockouts are gonna happen because I can force them to try to shoot on me. But then what happened? He went against the guy that he's got some ground game, but he beat him standing up and forced him to become the wrestler. Then you got a guy with better ground game dealing with a guy who doesn't ever shoot. So same thing with Rose. Rose went in there and she spoke about this when she was interviewed. She went in there with the mentality of, I mean, no one strikes with her, so I just struck with her. Whoa, mind blown. But it's a good way to put it. Carolina had a lot of success, right? She rocked her just from striking. She wanted no part in the ground. She just wanted to strike with her. She wanted to get into that clinch because she could use those knees. But Rose was just like, no, I'm just going to go in there. I'm just going to strike her. I'm going to strike with her. If it goes to the ground, it goes to the ground. She's comfortable enough on the ground compared to Joanna that if she gets tagged and Joanna goes in to finish it, she can pull her in or she can grab her and she'll be fine. We were all expecting Rose to win in a surprising sorry. We were all expecting Rose to win in an unpredictable fashion if she was going to win. Flying armbar, something crafty. Well, I would say a knockout for her is pretty crafty because she has to set that knockout up. And she set it up by, being herself, being loving, caring, and just all about the fighting aspect of it, being very professional, not caring about the whole shit talking, what's good with that kind of thing. And she just went on and she really just did what she does, right? Just went in there and fought. Very Brian Ortega-like. Very Max Holloway-like. These new up-and-coming fighters are just like, let's get back to fighting, man. Let's forget about all this trash talk. Just get back to fighting. That's what she is. She's all about that. So, the big thing about this, was this about mental warfare or about weight cutting? One side of the fence, the Rose side, says that they beat her mentally, which is very, very true. They didn't let the games fool her or let the games get into her head. Or is this the weight cutting aspect? Is this her getting dropped because she's cutting down to 120 or 115 and she should be at 125, and Joanna said that this wasn't the Joanna that everyone's used to because, I was cut and I did not do it right. She fired her whole team. Like, it was a big deal in her eyes. She thought that was the reason. Was it an emotional support that she used as an excuse for the loss? Maybe, maybe not. It's her first time losing professionally. Could have weighed heavy on her, but she's dealt with loss before, so I don't see at a championship level, maybe not to that, to that quality. She'll always be the strawweight queen. She determined that name for herself. Everyone believes it. As much as Rose is where Rose is now and is sitting as a champion, you can't neglect the dominance that Joanna imposed on the division for such a long time in a dominant and scary manner. Ronda did it in a way that it was dominant, but it wasn't scary. I mean, people wanted to fight Ronda because they thought they could beat her. People didn't want to fight Joanna. I mean, you did because you wanted the championship belt, but, everyone saw what they did. The dominance of what Ronda did was, I'm in and out of there in 60 seconds, and I get a cool paycheck, or maybe I get the belt. In Holly's case. But in Joanna's case, it's like, that's 4 rounds of getting my ass beat, not for, like, the same kind of money. But I do get to become the champion. So when Rose did it in such a dynamic fashion, I was like, oh, shit. Like, that's what the evolution of sport is all about. However, was this an emotional thing or emotional support thing for or an excuse, if you will? I personally don't think so. I think Joanna's come from enough hardship. I mean, she's from Poland, for God's sakes. Not that Poland's very, it's not like it was at one point a war-torn country, but it's not like It's going through some hard time right now. However, it's a hard place to live. It's cold as shit. I mean, there's a lot of Polish people that live in the States, and they immigrated from Poland to come to the States for a better life back in the day. I mean, my mom's whole side, my mom's side of the family is almost all Polish and Russian, right? It's a hard life over there. Why do you think Khabib is so fucking scary? I mean, the guy is from Dagestan. Obviously, it's not Poland, but it's a hard life in that Eastern European region. It's cold. It's mountainous. I mean, I don't know the shit that we have. I mean, it will produce a great fighter, and that's what we got out of Joanna. We got this fearless Polish ferocious Thai boxer, right? The only more ferocious Thai kickboxer or Muay Thai fighter that she's than her is Valentina. She's from Russia, right? So, degrees. There's levels to this shit. To this ferocity game. So I don't think it was. I think she handled the loss very well when she lost. Obviously, she cried. It's emotional. Losing your first professional fight, being a championship fight after all that dominance, thinking you're on top, thinking you're the best. Obviously, in the first round, it's heartbreaking. I get that, but Joanna's not one to make. I don't know if she's one to make excuses because she handled it like a champ should. The loss. She said she'll be back. She's posting on her Instagram how happy she is with her weight. So it's up to this fight to show whether or not it's the weight cut, and if it is the weight cut, start talking about going to 125. Get that rematch with that girl that took that belt from you back in the day. But if not, hey, maybe we'll see a change. Maybe it was. And so I personally think Rose does this again. Why? Because the mental warfare is not there. I think that's what wins Joanna a lot of these fights. She breaks girls. She breaks them mentally, and then she breaks them physically. It sucks. It's not a very great way that you want to go about it. Or want to lose a fight, or deal with lose that way, right? You don't want to lose in a way where you're mentally broken before you even get in there, and then after you're physically broken. I just don't think it affects Rose to the point where Rose has the power and the technical striking to deal with Joanna, and then has the confidence on the ground that it opens up her striking when she fights. She can fight with Joanna and not be fearful that she's going to try to go for a takedown. Right? And she's not fearful that Joanna's going to knock her out with one punch. So Rose can kind of just do her game. It's like she's sparring someone that doesn't hit as hard as she does. What does she have to lose? She's not going to get knocked out. She's not going to get taken down and submitted. She's just going to strike with this chick. So I think Rose does it again. So she takes that belt, Max Holloway style, beats her. What now? Let's move it along. And then you see that opening up of the strawweight division once again for more exciting matchups in the championship fights. Before we go on to the Khabib Holloway story, and I just want to go into that for just a second. I just want to emphasize the expedited evolution of women's MMA is ridiculous. We went from Generation 1 to Generation 2 like that. And what I mean by that is, and we went from Generation 2 to Generation 3 even faster. We're on that Generation 3, 4 train right now. And what I mean by that is, so we had the first one, Ronda, the specialist. Since MMA was already around and we saw what happened with the specialist back in the day, men had a little bit longer of an evolution to get to MMA because they had to actually pioneer MMA. And not like women couldn't, it's just that there was no women MMA, right? Maybe Cyborg back in the day. But by the time that Ronda was in the UFC, we had girls like Cyborg who knew everything. They were already blue belts in jiu-jitsu, but also wrestled on Wednesdays and competed on Muay Thai fights on Fridays and boxed with Olympic boxers on Thursdays, right? So there were already girls that were doing that. So by the time we got to the UFC, they had um, the main attraction was Ronda Rousey, a specialist, but had striking too. Like she was training with a boxing coach. It was in the day where like the big deal was just like, oh my god, you're a wrestler training with a boxing coach? Holy shit. Like that was the big deal. They had like a great boxing coach in your corner, but you're also a wrestler. Like the sky's the limit. And same thing, that's what happened with Ronda. She actually knocked people out. She was using her striking, and people were like, this is incredible. Then Holly Holm came along, and she's like, well, I excel in the striking department, but I also know a little bit of grappling, so let's see how that works out. And Gadoosh, we saw what happens when an extremely high-level striker with good takedown defense happens. And that's when Joanna popped out. The Sprawl and Brawl era came out of nowhere. Sprawl and Brawl. Joanna just started dominating. Chuck Liddell era, right? We had that evolution. That was only in, 2 years? And then the Miesha Tate happened. Oh, the jiu-jitsu night, the infamous rear naked chokes to end all rear naked chokes against Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz. Influenced that Brian Ortega, not influenced Brian Ortega, but put the emphasis on submission fighters and the guys that could do it, and the Damian Maias and the guys that could do the striking with the submissions and have that pretty good ground game as well. Right, Miesha Tate having the wrestling, but also having that submission, that finishing ability. Shit, that made a lot of people worry about wrestlers now. These wrestlers, they not only they were like, ugh, well, if I'm getting sprawled on, I have to brawl. Well, I should probably find a way to make this ground fight a little bit more interesting. So then wrestlers got into that, and that's when like the mixed martial arts era started happening, right? And when I mean the mixed martial arts era, I just mean just that overall takeover of everything. All right, and now the I like to call it the X Factor era. The era where you had Anderson Silva, who had everything. He had the jiu-jitsu. He had the striking. Let's see, what other champs? He had the Cain Velasquez, the wrestling and the striking. It was just MMA. Like, these guys knew everything. But what made them champs were these X Factors. Well, now we have that, right? We're in this X Factor era with the girls. We're in this era where the specialists with a little bit of knowledge in other areas don't cut it anymore. And this happened in, a year, right? We saw the Amanda Nunes transition. We saw this girl who came in, has everything, just wiped the floor with Miesha Tate. Miesha Tate's like, I'm going to go for a takedown. Nope. Punches. Bam. I'm going to strike with you. Nope. Punches, takedown, whatever, right? She learned from her losses. She got better. She evolved as an MMA fighter. And then her X Factor. She's lesbian. She's from Brazil. She's from where I'm from. She's got these things that also make her promotable, are marketable. They also have these. There's also other X factors. Her power is incredible for a woman. For a woman just in general. And then the cyborg, the X factor, her being cyborg, and then Rose now. Rose's X factor is her unpredictability. There's different things that you have to worry about now. Some girls, it's like the conditioning. Right, some places just do unbelievable conditioning and strength and conditioning workouts. And either way, the X Factor, another example would be the John Jones era, right? John Jones is incredible, right? He's talented everywhere in MMA. There's nowhere that he's not as good. He's not better in anywhere, or he's not worse in any area than he is better. It's just that the X Factor, the genetic freak genetics that he has that make him an incredible athlete, also a talented champion. So just highlight that, just take your time and get into the women's division if you're not already, and just wait. I know I know it's a little rough to watch, but nowadays, no, there's these specific girls in there. If you watch them, you'll see the greatness that's coming. That's on the forefront of coming to our women's MMA. The less tense fights, the Caitlin Vieira, right? She she took Kat Zingano down, and it seemed more like Kat was the old school, very wild with punches, like fighting with the emotion. And then Caitlin Vera, very calm, composed, taking him down, and using a real game plan. Just not saying that Kat didn't have a game plan, but being smart, using that fight IQ, being a professional about it. All right, so my pick is Rose. Could be finish. I'm going to go with finish again. I think she finishes her again. Right? Typically when two fighters fight, and the older one. Not in the Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping case. I will say that. It's an anomaly, if you will. But typically when two fighters fight and the older fighter loses and then they rematch, the quicker fighter will win, or the younger fighter will win, but even a quicker fashion. And that you saw the John Jones fight against DC. All right, so moving on to Khabib versus Max Holloway for the 155 championship. Holy shit, this fight is insane. It really is, actually. I know it's not the Tony Khabib fight. I know it's not Max Holloway on a 6 weeks or 9 weeks fight camp getting ready for Khabib fight. But let me just I'm going to break down the skills for it this easily. Max Holloway is exactly like Tony Ferguson, minus some skills. His wrestling and his counter wrestling aren't up to where Tony's is. His submissions are up there, but they're not Tony level. But striking as versatile, if not more, fluidity-wise. Uses his range very well. A little bit more composed and technical. Doesn't get his hit as bad. Invites brawling, but is smart with it. When he brawls, for example, the Ricardo Lamas fight, anytime that they threw wide punches, he forced Ricardo Lamas to throw outside hooks, and when he entices the brawl, he always takes the inside, right? He throws hooks, but they're like these kinds of hooks. They're not out here wide with like everything. Like, oh, you want to brawl? Like, I'll bite down on my mouthpiece and just start throwing. And he does. He bites down his mouthpiece, but he watches. He's like, I'm just gonna get the inside. So anytime Ricardo came out wide, Max Holloway came out wide, but just a little bit shorter, so that way he could beat him on the inside. I think he uses his range very well, and I think he could keep Khabib on the outside and pop him, right? If he can keep that jab, switch stances, really frustrate Khabib on which side to go for a takedown, yada, yada, yada. Max Holloway fights kind of like Tony Ferguson that way, pressure forward, talk shit, doesn't throw spinning stuff as much, isn't as unpredictable that way. But I think what happens is Khabib wins this fight, and the reason is that wrestling experience, that submission, anti-wrestling, anti-grappling game that Tony has is the key to beating Khabib, and no one holds that key, right? Tony has that key. Max does a very good job, but he's not to that level yet. He's still very young. He can hold that key eventually. He might get to that level, but for right now, Tony's got that key. So I think Khabib wins, and that, 6 days is very hard to get ready for that. But you can never count Maxie Baby out. He's Tony in the sense where he embodies that fighting spirit. That's why I can't wait for that Brian Ortega fight. He embraces that. You're going to have to kill me to get me out of here. And he's fine with that against Khabib. So you're going to see a 5-round war. Or you're going to see 5-round mauling. But either way, you're going to see 5 rounds. Khabib's not getting Max Holloway out there. If he does get Max Holloway out of there, damn, you might not see Khabib versus Conor. Because Conor had a split decision, or Conor had a unanimous win fight against Max Holloway back in the day. He still holds over Max Holloway, but he was injured during that fight, right? They were both injured. But if Khabib just storms and runs through Max Holloway, it's going to be very hard to just be like, oh, you ready for that, Conor? Because that's a guy that you went 5 rounds with on a bum knee, but still, and that guy was injured too, and that was an easy fight. And this guy just kicked him out to the side. So I look at Max Holloway as the featherweight champion we don't deserve, right? Batman. I'm the hero that the city needs, not the one it deserves. Same idea, right? The featherweight champ that we loved and gave all of our attention and Instagram follows and likes to was Conor McGregor. And how does he treat us? He's gone 500 something days without defending his lightweight title. He's never defended his featherweight title. He's barely put any forward records on, or any. He hasn't broken any records when it comes to like actual legacy in the sport. But then when you look at Max Holloway, 10-fight winning streak. Finally, UFC featherweight champion, gets the call to step up. Lightweight champion on 6 days' notice. Let me save this shit. I'm doing it for Hawaii and my fans. Fuck yeah, blessed era. That's the champ that we deserve. A guy willing to step in, fight an animal on 6 days' notice. Not necessarily, he's like not risking his belt, but he has a chance to become double champ. Not a guy that talked his way after losing or after winning a fight against a top 5 guy that he already lost to, and then just talking his way back into that title contention, or title fight against Eddie Alvarez, and then he wins and then never defends it. Talking about a guy that's defended his belt twice against a guy, or against the best of all time, and then on top of that, in the featherweight division, arguably, and then on top of that, the second time he fought him, it was on 2 weeks notice, or it was on 2 weeks notice, or a couple weeks notice, and he beat him. And in this fight, 6 days notice. Let me do it. I'm going for it. All right, I'm gonna try to make history. So, if Khabib wins, obviously he gets the fight with Conor. Obviously he becomes a champ. And we already know what happens when Khabib wins. So I'm gonna leave you guys with this. What happens if Max Holloway wins? Well, these are some options. And guess what? I want you guys to go about your day, and I want you guys to really embrace this and get hyped, because there's 6 days. As much as this changed, we can still get hyped in 6 days for this. Excuse me. And that's this. If Max Holloway wins, he becomes a second Hawaiian champ. He increases his win streak again, beats a guy that's undefeated, comes up in weight after 6 days' notice, cements himself as the greatest featherweight of all time. And not only that, Conor's going to be sitting ringside, and they've been talking shit already. Conor and him face off in the octagon for the 155-pound championship and the 145-pound championship. Let's get this rematch started going. I cannot wait for this fight Saturday, because the implications after, if Max Holloway wins, are set it up to be one of the most exciting rematches of all time in the 145 and 155-pound championship realm. Double champs going at it to see who the real double champ is. And I think you guys, if Max Holloway wins, I think you guys will be so ready for this, and we'll be talking about this fight a lot. And what's hard is what happens to Brian Ortega during all this. Maybe he and someone fight for an interim championship at 145. Like Brian Ortega versus whoever else is up the 145-pound. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. We'll figure it out when it comes time. But if Max Holloway wins, Conor McGregor, 155, 145-pound championship on the line. So 2 championship belts on the line. I think that would be the first. Right? When Eddie Alvarez was going against Conor McGregor, it wasn't like Eddie Alvarez was also fighting for the 145. When Stipe versus Daniel fight, it's not also for the 205 belt. Daniel's relinquishing his belt, or he's going to try to. And when DJ was going to fight TJ, it wasn't for both belts. For TJ, it kind of was. He'll take it. But if DJ won, it wasn't for the 135 belt. This time it would be for both belts. All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Monday. I know the Sunday with the cancellation of the Tony versus Khabib fight is, it's a sad, sad world these MMA gods put upon us. But as a hardcore fan, we're about to get one of the greatest potential outcomes to hit the UFC, and it's everything that they've wanted. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll be back here Wednesday for a breakdown of the card, the rest of it, and I'll give you guys your sip and slips, daily dose of MMA news and gossip, and to hear more about what happens this week. Other than that, you can follow me on Instagram, DanielJonas94, and Twitter, and Facebook as well. And you can also find the podcast Southern Scrap Nation, as well as at Southern Scrap on Twitter. Hope you guys once again have a great rest of your week. I'll see you guys back here Wednesday. Let's get hyped for this fight.